This is Matt Orozco with Macabre Daily, and I'm joined by another one of my fellow New Yorkers and contributors to the site.
Hi, I'm Lowell Greenglat, and I also write for Macabre Daily.
Awesome. Well, Lowell and I get to hang out quite a bit here in New York and talk about horror. And we figured, why don't we just record ourselves talking about it, and then we can put it on the site. And especially considering that the series finale of Chucky just premiered, or the series just ended rather, this past Tuesday.
And it got renewed, so it's coming back.
That's right, season. So the series is coming back, but the season itself has concluded. And so we figured we'd talk about what we thought, what we liked, what we didn't like, all of and everything that happens in between. But as a starting point, I wanted to get your thoughts, Lowell, on like, what do you think about the franchise overall, like the Child's Play Chucky franchise?
Surprisingly strong. I think like a lot of people who haven't seen most of the movies or who are vaguely familiar with it kind of make fun of it as like the killer doll series. But the quality has been pretty consistent. I mean, of course, there are peaks and valleys. Some entries are better than the others, but they're all watchable at the very least, which is more than I can say for even some franchise entries of franchises that I love.
I know exactly what you mean. I believe your disdain for Halloween 5 is much like a car accident on the freeway. You can't help but look at it, even though you know you should look away. And I would agree that I think as far as franchises go, the Child's Play franchise, Chucky franchise, whatever, because obviously the Child's Play name got removed from them somewhat. And I'm going to leave out the remake as far as when I think about the series, just because I see that as it's similar but different. But I would agree, its consistency is definitely there. I think that consistency, the mileage on that will vary depending on tastes. But at the same time, you really can't. There really isn't a better franchise that has done, like, there's no other franchise that I can think of, at least major franchise in the horror genre, that has been as consistent to not just its characters but also its story. And Halloween tried to do that to some extent with the David Gordon Green 2018. I think it actually does it lesser in a lesser than way than the Child's Play series has, even though there are some absolute absurdities to the series which are touched on in the show.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was thinking about it, and I think the Saw movies are the only other horror film series that's as plentiful and keeps the same sort of sense of continuity throughout. But like, you need an Excel spreadsheet to keep up with what's going on in the Saw franchise. But like Chucky, it's just like, it's like dragging the lake. It's like the further you get along in the series, it's like, don't worry, all of the baggage is coming with us, but we'll tell you about it, and it's not going to get in the way of enjoying it.
Yeah, I do. And I think that comes with its own set of like great, like, the fact that, and I think we can dive into even like just kind of what we liked about the series. Because from my perspective, I think anything with a horror, like any franchise that decides to diverge in this way, I mean, there haven't been many good examples of it. Like Friday the 13th had a TV series that was largely unrelated to Jason Voorhees, which was, it's a choice. I'm not going to put any judgment on it, but there's also the Nightmare on Elm Street, Freddy's Nightmares, which again were like so disconnected from the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, and the only linchpin being Robert Englund. But the stories themselves, you could have called them just Outer Limits episodes and no one would have noticed.
Or like proto Tales from the Crypt episodes. I think most of the crew from Freddy's Nightmares went to work on Tales from the Crypt afterwards. So I don't know if it's an urban legend or if it's true, but since the Crypt Keeper was designed by Kevin Yeager, they say that the Crypt Keeper's eyes are Chucky's eyes. Like, he just reused the eyes from the doll, but I don't know if that's real, but if it's an urban legend, it's a great one.
Yeah, and I think I forget I think the only film he didn't work on was Seed of Chucky, and that was because he was doing another movie at the time. So it's, obviously having someone like that behind Chucky. And I think that's actually one of the strengths of the series, is the fact that you have Brad Dourif not only doing like he seems to get better as Chucky as each entry goes on, in a way that like Robert Englund kind of was on that arc as Freddy, and then it became a little bit the plot lines became so farcical that it was kind of hard to take the movies and Freddy in turn seriously. I think you could probably say the same about Chucky, but at the same time, that's always been a part of it, is that he's always been this kind of foul mouth, like terrible human being, serial killer who, has a personality that is somewhat endearing from a very, very outside perspective. But that's kind of what worked with the show, is it felt like they were using, and again, maybe I'm just not good enough at spotting CG anymore, but it felt like much of the use of Chucky was practical. And I think that that has largely been consistent. And one of the reasons why it's been so entertaining, at least to watch the Child's Play films, because they haven't been as beholden to CGI, at least at the character levels, as some other horror, not even franchises, just horror films are.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I still can't believe how good Chucky looked for this TV show. I honestly think he looked better than he did in the last two Chucky movies, Curse and Cult. Not that he looked bad in those, but like you can definitely feel some cable TV money being pumped into practical effects, which was awesome. Like I totally bought him as a character, and soon into the first episode, I was like, holy shit, I'm watching a Chucky TV show. Like, who thought this was even possible? And you just, the practical effects definitely help you buy into it a lot. I honestly can't recall how much CGI was in the show overall. Like, aside from like blood, I don't think there were many, if any, CGI doll effects that I could recall.
Didn't seem that way. I mean, I think a lot of the CGI was largely reserved for, and I don't know this is a fact either, as I just stated, as I get older, my ability to spot bullshit gets lessened. But I think that like some of the gunshots and things like that are probably CG. And also just some of the blood effects seemed like, and then we saw that in the last two Chucky films, they were
Yeah,
definitely leaning into the CGI blood, which is fine. Like, I'm getting more and more okay with that. We've come a long way since like
save
Spawn
your
is like,
money for Chucky as a practical effect. Like that's what we want to see. Yeah.
yep. And I think that, to some extent, not just the practical effects, but also just the level of violence that they pulled off. Like kept saying to myself, I remember a time, and I think we're about the same age. So I think, you remember the same time as I do, where you couldn't say what half of what they were saying on cable television. And the violence level was certainly not something you could do 20, 50, even 10 years ago, I would say. I mean, HBO obviously changed a lot of that, but the violence that they pulled off in this thing was impressive. And the language, I mean, I think they only bleeped one word. And
Yeah, but it's profane and bloody and violent. And when I first heard about it, I heard it was going to like SyFy and USA. I was like, are you sure? Like, even Shudder, maybe, although I don't know if Shudder would have the budget to mount something like this, but but like it's shocking but also welcome how much they got away with. So I think we lucked out in that department. I just can't believe we have a Chucky TV show. I feel like I'm gonna keep saying that over and over again, but like here
and it
it
was
is.
good. That's the surprising part, isn't that they did it, because as what is it, Jeff Goldblum, like, we'd never asked ourselves if we could, but if we should, right? Like
Yeah.
the fact that you took a slasher film based on a killer doll and made a series out of it. Now, sure, it has the typical trappings of any series nowadays, where it has to fill a time slot, and that means that there are some parts of it that tend to drag and aren't as good. But overall, especially taken not as like a binge series, I was watching it, for the most part week to week, save for the last few episodes. I kind of watched those in a couple days, but it is really well dosed in a way that you don't necessarily feel like Slasher is a good example of a show that I think had similar cadence, but at the same time, I think Chucky does it better, in that they have a through line with the previous context of the story and the franchise to pull from. They don't have to make up all this history on the fly, for better or worse. But the fact that it's good is the most surprising part to me. And I think that's a big credit to Don Mancini, who has not only been consistent, but like clearly has a vision and is willing to to die on that hill, because you and I have talked about this off camera, but regardless of of how good some other franchises are, especially the divergent storylines like in Halloween, at least they're putting a stake in the ground, and for me that matters. Like, at least the creators are making a decision about where they want this to go. It doesn't mean it's the right decision or the good or the best direction, but Don Mancini clearly stuck to his guns, it seems, on the plot and the characters, and pulled it off.
Yeah. And I mean, that I think is consistent also with the rest of the series. Because like I said, even if, there's peaks and valleys, but he's trying with like all of those scripts. Like, you might not like what he does, but it's like, who thought, okay, I'm gonna make the 4th Chucky movie and it's gonna be a road movie, and I'm gonna introduce a bride, and Seed of Chucky is like, it's just a farce. Like, it's not even like a funny horror comedy, like a funny horror movie, I should say. It is a straight up horror comedy. Like, he's doing things with each of these movies. I mean, I even rewatched Child's Play 2 last month. It's like not even 90 minutes. It's like an hour and 24 or something like that. And it's great. It's just lean, mean, you get in, you get out. There's not much fat. And I mean, for a show, I guess it was 8 episodes on USA Network. Of course, there's going to be some bloat. There's going to be some extraneous stuff. And I can kind of see how maybe this season sort of started out as the idea for like Child's Play 8. And then he like expanded it to a TV show. But like, it doesn't feel like he just added stuff like for the hell of it. It really felt like, it held together nicely, which is a nice surprise.
It is, and I think it even in some way made me appreciate the past 2 entries in the series even more, because I initially kind of not so much Curse, but Cult of Chucky was a pretty, for me, like kind of divisive entry, in that they make some pretty bold statements about the mythos in regards to Chucky and how he can split his soul up essentially. Big swing. But it worked. I mean, like in some way, like they stuck to that and they executed against it here to a pretty good effect. And I think that, we're obviously going to talk about spoilers, so I'll make sure to put a spoiler warning ahead of this.
I'll try not to get ahead of the spoiler warning, but yeah.
No, but I think I'll put it at the beginning. I'll like just put it in the post or something like that. But I think that does a good job of just really doubling down on something and seeing it pay off. I think really was worthwhile. Again, and it's a bit silly as a premise, but you know what? You kind of lose sight of that silliness because it does take itself seriously. And that's admirable. It knows when to make fun of itself. It knows when to play it straight. And it got some pretty great performances from some actors who have largely been, or at least Devon Sawa was making a comeback, but he largely hasn't been as popular as he was before, and I think he did great.
Yeah, but I want to backtrack a little bit to what you said about the silliness. I think Don Mancini definitely learned that lesson on Seed of Chucky, because Seed of Chucky is like, it's not known as being one of the better ones, but it's a hoot. Like, it's all over the place. And I feel like, whereas that was a little, it was a little too much there, it's just the right amount here. Like, he took what worked in Seed of Chucky in terms of like the camp, and he brought it to the TV show. So it had just the right amount of camp, but like, it's still scary. Like, you're not laughing the whole time, and that worked for Seed of Chucky. But like, I'm glad, we didn't get any jokes about Jennifer Tilly and her crappy career in this, or at least not much of it. So
that was on the nose.
Yeah. And but yeah, it was a really good cast. I mean, but I love Devon Sawa. I don't know why he's playing twins. Like, I don't know, like maybe they're like, well, let's keep you around for longer. And I mean, The Sopranos did it, so why not? But yeah, it's like the cast. I mean, the kids are pretty good, and like watching
Very
them,
good.
it makes me think that Don Mancini should make a remake of Sleepaway Camp, because these the kids just suck so hard. Like they it's like, you know, you expect like, oh, Lexi's gonna be the mean girl, but like in the Halloween party episode when she's like dressed as the dad, faking like electrocuting herself, I was like, oh my god,
Yeah,
that's
there's awful.
rough. Yeah.
And I think that that's something I kind of thought about around the way Don Mancini character, and I think I again a lot of credit. I don't know the other writers off the top of my head, so I don't want to just say that he was the only fuel
Mhm.
behind this, but I get the sense that he is largely responsible for a lot of what we saw, given how close he's been to the series throughout. But part of me, and again, I'm 36, so I'm not as close to the youth as I used to be. And it'd be kind of weird if I was hanging out at high schools, but like the idea, like I couldn't tell if he was like he definitely writes these characters a lot of respect, and he doesn't treat them like the children that they're supposed to be necessarily. But I also found myself wondering, is this how kids really act and talk? Like, are people really that vicious? Like we see, we see instances of that in real life. It's much more, um, it's less theatrical. It's more amateur hour in regards to like how bullying kind of has persisted. But at the same time, the way that even characters talk, the way that they had high like emotional intelligence. I mean, maybe it's just the new generation of children, and I think just it's a credit to the writing of those characters that they give them that respect. Because I think if you don't have that, it's really hard to take what you're seeing seriously when the characters that it's happening to aren't characterized well. To the point of Sleepaway Camp, it's like everyone in that movie is so rotten. You're like, don't feel bad for anybody for what happens to them.
Mhm.
And you are always rooting for Angela because she's the only one of anyone who seems to be somewhat redeemable, like, adults and kids alike.
Yeah. And what was I gonna say? Um, yeah, I mean, you know, I was just glad that they didn't go with the like mid '90s. Every teenager is brilliant and is a walking dictionary, and you know the Kevin Williamson of it all. And I like Kevin Williamson, but there's
Yeah.
nothing worse than someone trying to rip off Kevin Williamson. It's just teeth gratingly cringe. But you know, I bought them as teenagers. Not sure I bought Jake like becoming trying to be a killer like that quickly. I thought that was a little rushed. Um, but you know, like I was also I had to like constantly remind myself they're in middle school. I'm like, wait, they're not in high school, right? Is it high school or middle school? But it is middle school, right?
Now I'm questioning that myself. I could have
Sorry.
sworn, I think it was eighth grade. I think you're right. I think they were at the end of middle school.
Okay.
But I mean, there is a bit of Hollywood magic, showbiz happening when we think about like, do these characters really look their age? Like, no. But at the same time, I don't really know the way that they're written. If you want to have like, I don't want to put down actors who are in the middle school age, but I also think that the kind of scenes they're being thrust into, I would imagine that these actors are probably in their late teens,
Mhm.
probably over 18 for the most part. Um, but still, like I think it was good casting overall, and it didn't bother me. Like it wasn't something that I found myself being distracted by. Like it wasn't like having, you know, uh, Josh Hartnett like cast as like a middle schooler or high schooler in Halloween H2O. It's like no, I mean, he looks like a boy, but he's definitely not in high
Yeah.
school. Like it doesn't check out. But
Yeah. It doesn't feel like Stranger Things, where like I'm looking forward to that fourth season, but like they could all rent a car at this point. Like you, what do they look like on bikes now? That's just going to be silly.
yeah, yeah, they
But
can't get that 25-year-old or above discount, but they're not far away, I'm sure.
yeah,
Um,
they could
and
buy beer somewhere.
some, yeah. I mean, at this point, when they're that famous, I'm sure the beer just buys you. Um, but I did think that keeping it, the characters did have, and I can't comment too much on like the characterization, particularly on the aspects of the romance angle, because listen, like I think Don Mancini has done a great job since Seed of Chucky at really putting more of kind of his personal experience into these films. And he's even talked a little bit about with this series how he put a bit of himself into the Jake character, and how it was his chance to kind of go back and offer up a bit of perspective from what he was thinking and feeling, albeit under a different time. in context that we have today, where there's a greater level of acceptance, and the fact that that gay relationships in television are just it's become normal, which is it's a great progress as far as I'm concerned. But I think the way he treats it is not to make a spectacle of it. It's really to treat it as this is nothing. It just is, yeah. And again, that's just good writing, good characterization. I don't think all of it worked necessarily. I think that there are some things, like being so beholden to its own characters and storyline does come with its fair share of benefits as well as it does burdens. I think introducing Kyle again, like, felt a bit wasted. It was nice to see Kyle, but at the same time, played very little of a role in the long and short of things. Alex Vincent, though, like seeing Andy back was great. Like the way that they characterize Andy totally made me. It kind of is almost like retribution for the way Andy was treated.
Yeah, and it's Alex Vincent hasn't really acted until these movies came back, and I mean, you can kind of tell a little bit. He's not bad, but it's like he's sort of running to catch up with a few people who seem to have been doing this more recently, but he's fine. Like, he's game, and he does make Andy a compelling character, which, I mean, that's one of the magic tricks of the series.
Yep.
It's like at the, he has a cameo at the end of the well, I don't want to ruin
episode.
it, but it's like, well, no, but like for the movies, it's like who knew he was going to come back to the movies, or that Don Mancini would ever be like, yeah, let's bring back Andy, let's bring back Kyle. People love Child's Play too, so let's see like what happened to them, which is like, it's a minor miracle. And it is a little silly that they're like driving all over the country or whatever, looking for Chucky dolls and like pointing the gun like they're in Pulp Fiction. But like, but that is part of the camp that Don Mancini, I believe, wants for the show. So you just kind of accept it.
Yeah, it's easy to buy into. Like if you're, and again, I think it's if you're a fan of the series up to this point, to some extent, like if you don't hate them or dislike them outright, then you're not going to have a hard time buying the way that they characterize. And I actually looked at Andy's character slightly differently, in that I kind of like, there's a reservation to the character, which may or may not be intentional. I have no idea, but you can tell like this guy's fucking traumatized. Now he's slightly different. Like at the end of Cult of Chucky, like there is a bit of a sadistic component to that, but at the same time, the way that he's characterized in the show does give me the sense that like this guy is still dealing with the trauma of being terrorized by a killer doll. And to that end, like he's not overacting that trauma out. He's also not like kind of underplaying it. So I do like his kind of retribution arc that he gets in. No need to spoil the end of the show, but I think that there is a pretty great, conclusion, which makes me wonder if they always thought they were going to have a second season or not. I think it's kind of hard to know with these shows, because I think I just read Cowboy Bebop just got canceled.
Yeah, I just saw that too. Like,
wasn't expecting that.
Yeah.
But I do like, when it comes back to, some of the things that I think I think could have worked a little better, is mostly that I think the show format for things like this really can hinder the pace at which it moves. Like the flashback things, for example, to me were interesting for not the reason I think they intended. I thought that having Fiona Dourif play Charles Lee Ray is cool, but it's cool like one or two times.
Definitely overplayed it.
And I think that was, to me, that backstory stuff felt so much like filler, because it didn't really, the ultimate end conclusion of it was just to explain how Child's Play happened, right? The beginning of Child's Play. And I think that's...
Which they did in Curse of Chucky. Like, they covered that ground already with Brad Dourif, but now you're doing it with Fiona. And it's cool that they got like prosthetics on her, and like they made her, look like her dad. And I feel like that whole thing came about because Don Mancini saw that she could do a really good impression of her dad So he's like, I'm going to write that into everything Chucky related from now on, which is fine. But it's like, it's like, oh, okay, here this is again.
And they do look a lot alike, like,
Yeah.
obviously being that related, that makes sense, but it's an uncanny resemblance for even a father and a daughter. So I think
Mhm.
if you're gonna, unless you go the Irishman route of CGIing Brad Dourif back
No one
into
wants
his.
to go to the Irishman route.
No,
Yeah.
no, it was a bad move
No.
for Scorsese. It was a bad move it's a bad move in general. But
Hmm.
I thought that was fun idea. I just, there was
Hmm.
too much. You can't have too much of a good thing, and I think that was just precisely that, which is, it's really neat once, second time is
Hmm.
fine, third time, fourth time, and they just kept going back to that well in the back half of the season. And I also
Hmm.
don't, I think to some extent origin stories don't matter at some point. Like, I don't
Hmm.
necessarily, like, we don't need
Not
to kind of.
Chucky's, especially.
Yeah.
I did not need any of those flashbacks when he's a little kid, because he's not Michael Myers or Jason. He's not some eldritch monster or someone who made a deal with the devil or whatever. He's just a guy. He's a serial killer who improvised at just the right moment, and that's how this franchise happened. He was never planning to like become a doll. It was just like, all right, what's around me? The cops are closing in, and this will happen. But he's human. He's just a dick. He was born that way. It's fine.
I'm never gonna think of it any other way than as a serial killer who did the right, who improvised at the exact right time. but
Yeah,
but
that's literally what it is. That's the beginning of Child's Play. He got in through the toy store. I mean, who knows? He could have gotten into Sears and possessed a toaster or something. Like,
would have made the Brave Little Toaster a very different movie, that's for sure.
yeah.
Um, but I do like that they are keeping consistent with some of these characters, like the Nika character. I still
Mhm.
don't fully understand how someone goes from being paralyzed and then not paralyzed despite personality changes. But again, I'm going to put that
Voodoo.
aside. Yeah,
That's what it is. It's
I'm
voodoo.
putting that aside as, like, that's show business, baby. But like,
Mhm.
I think that the larger sentiment though I got from it is, like, there was something compelling that kept me watching. And I'm not someone who typically really goes all in on TV shows, just because I
Mhm.
find them to be difficult. I find them to be largely overlong and difficult to keep pace with, especially ones that are kind of dosed out, the way that this was.
Mhm.
But there was something compelling keeping you going into each episode. And I think, again, that a lot of that's just because we're seeing a very different take on a very familiar theme, which is Chucky, basically in this case, influencing others to do wrong while he's also
Mhm.
doing wrong. And the kids were, entertaining enough to watch. Despite some, like, again, I think the way that the junior character turns out, it's a bit of a reach. Um,
Yeah, maybe with more, I don't know, time, we could have that could have landed a bit better. Because when it happens, I'm like, oh well, that's kind of quick, but all right, going with it. So,
and it's not I think that's the key thing for me, is like, it's not distracting. Like, the bumps in the road are just that, they're largely forgettable bumps, and they're
yeah.
only really obvious when you really think about it and pick it apart, kind of like we're doing. Um,
Mhm.
because everything else about it just seemed to hit on every single cylinder. I mean, even the self-referential aspects of it were entertaining and endearing. Um, and I definitely appreciated the very end, of how they kind of broke the fourth wall. Um, and again, it was
Mhm.
silly, but like, it's so on brand for
Mhm.
for the Chucky character. And Brad Dourif, again, I can't say this enough. He's still so
Ah,
fucking good. Like, the man's a goddamn treasure
I
in every
know.
way.
What right does he have? Like, it's like I bet Robert Englund just looks at him with severe jealousy. Like, you just get to sit in a booth and just be the same character that you've been for 30 years, whereas I gotta wear padding and fight Jason on a fucking lake. I don't know if I can curse in this, but
No,
like,
we can't,
but
absolutely.
yeah, yeah,
Like,
but yeah, no, I mean, the thing, like, okay, this is a bit of a stretch, but like, walk with me here. Remember when Grindhouse came out and it was like this big deal, and they had fake trailers, and there was a fake trailer of Machete, and everyone was like, "Oh my god, that's hilarious." But then Grindhouse flopped, and Robert Rodriguez was like, "All right, well, I'm gonna go and make Machete," and they're like, "Really?" He's like, "Yes, I have the trailer. I'm gonna make the movie Machete," and they're like, "All right."
Okay.
I feel like that's Don Mancini. Like, you can't stop Don Mancini's brain from working and just spouting out whatever he does. Like, he's like, like C to Chucky. All right, I'm gonna have just we're gonna explore gender and sexuality through dolls. I'm gonna have John Waters. I'm gonna have him kill Britney Spears. What's the problem? And then, oh, I'm going to reboot it, and I'm going to have the main character be in a wheelchair, and then in the next one I'm going to have him split his soul into multiple dolls. We can get a budget for multiple dolls, right? It's like he's got all these big ideas, and for better or for worse, they all get in there. Like, I can't imagine there's much that stays on the cutting room floor with him. Like, if he has an idea board or a Kanban board or whatever it is, I don't think there's much on there that's left over. And, for better or for worse. And I think there are cases of for worse a few times, but like, you got to respect that he's just going for it all the time. And I mean, my God, Jennifer Tilly is having the time of her life
Chewing
in this
scenery,
show.
just chomping it up.
Academy Award nominee Jennifer Tilly is just going batshit and loving it. I mean, there was a point where I thought I would kind of watch a spin-off show of her and Fiona Dourif as Chucky and Tiffany, just like on the road, like natural born killers. Maybe I wouldn't last a whole season of that because it might be too much after a while, but I'd love to see where that's going to go. You know what I mean? But like, the infectiousness of that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I agree with your aspect of like kind of nothing left on the floor with Don Mancini. But I also, to put that in perspective, I think you can look at another Don, like a Don Coscarelli in the Phantasm series. And I think those are two examples of creators who've largely been, I don't want to say in full control, but have had quite a bit of liberty with their franchises and have been and been working alongside them for every single entry in some capacity. And I think the difference is like, and I love Phantasm, but I also find that those sequels are of, diminishing returns. Whereas the Chucky franchise actually kind of goes like this. Like, it's very
Child's
rare.
Play 2 is great. Like, it's not the original. Some people say 2 is better than 1. I'm like, that's a bridge too far. Those are the people who think Season of the Witch is the best Halloween movie. There's a big overlap there, but it's wrong. But like, still, like, for a slasher sequel that came out in 1990, it's way better than it has any right to be.
And I'm a defender of Child's Play 3, even though nobody else is, because I think that even though it's not
the opening
greatest,
sequence is cool.
I think
that's all I got.
It does something different. I think the military academy landscape is a really good one. I don't think they necessarily did it well, and I think there's a lot of reasons why it's not as good as many other entries. But you know what? They moved on, and I think that ability to pivot is largely what defines the franchise. And leading into this TV series is that they know when to change things and just the right amount. Going with the Bride of Chucky route. Not only having was it Ronnie Yu?
Ronnie Yu did the fourth one.
Like, and you wouldn't like. I don't think there's a direct. I don't think his aesthetic necessarily shines through to the extent that someone could say, "Oh, it's a Ronnie Yu movie." So much more than it does the other, like even Seed of Chucky, not being his movie. But like, I think that they knew when to take things a different direction and and I think Don Mancini is still got his finger on the pulse of like the youth in some way, or at least it keeps current enough that he's not writing. He's not Ridley Scott, like yelling at the sky for cell phones being invented and ruining his films. Like it's a level of understanding that, almost an embracing of the current culture and not mocking it, because there's plenty to be mocked. And I think we've seen as we are both millennials that like the generation like shit pouring happens regularly. But I think that in this way there's a lot of avoiding of that by not only taking these characters seriously, but giving them some pretty serious shit to deal with. I mean, everyone's fucking
Mhm.
parents die. Like,
Yeah,
it's
it's like
fucked
a
up.
theme throughout, and it's really dark. Like the love interest, Devin, like his mom dies and then he's kidnapped and used as bait for, well, I don't know if we're in spoilers, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah, we're in
like
spoiler
it's
territory. We're all
really
in.
it's like yeah, yeah, everyone's parents died. Like Junior is a tragic character. And I don't know what the point of his mom having cancer was necessarily. Like when it was all said and done, I'm like, is that so she can get to a building where the cancer doctor's office is high enough that she could be pushed out? Or is it maybe just like another thing that's supposed to push Junior along his path to make him flip out? I don't know. But like,
There was a little
I
bit
don't
of
know.
over dramatization, I think, and I think that's largely been that. If I could
Mhm.
say, like, there's one thing about the plotting that I noticed is that there's a lot of heightened senses. Like, there's a lot of extremes, right? Like we see,
Yeah, it is
like
very
for
heightened.
like the young girl, like the sister, I forget her name, but like the sister to Lexi,
Mhm.
like how is she not absolutely fucking like scarred by all the things that she just observed? Like she's largely very
Mhm.
much like she's sitting in that theater by herself while everyone's
Mhm.
getting murdered and she's totally unfazed. Like
Mhm.
that to me is just like that's almost an extreme. Like either this girl's a sociopath or something is
Mhm.
wrong, or this is just over or under
Well,
dramatizing when needed.
I think they established that she's on the spectrum or that she has some sort of
Oh, they did.
cognitive difficulty. So
Oh,
maybe that like sort of, I don't know. I'm not a doctor, but maybe that sort of like shields a little bit of the worst aspects of that, at least while it's happening. But I mean, you see with comedic effect that she's like playing video games with Chucky, and Chucky's like, "I'm gonna go kill your sister," and she's
yeah.
just like, "Okay," you know. So I think maybe that's also a case of like, well, it was a joke before. Like, is it still a joke now? I don't know. Let's just burn the theater down, you know.
I mean, and that is that I think if I might have missed like the characterization of her, but either way, like the point stands around. There's just so much drama, like the fact that all of these characters are awful too. Like some of these characters are
Mm-hmm.
really awful. Like Devin Saw was as the Logan, not or Lucas was Jake's dad, right? Or Logan.
I think it was Lucas.
Yeah. So like he's a real
Excuse
shit
me.
person, you know, like,
Mm-hmm.
and he has probably one of the best deaths in the entire Child's Play series. Like that to me, like was probably the like when I think about a Chucky kill, like I think when you look at slashers particularly, you can kind of give them a special move, if you will. And like Jason's, like I think is largely defined by Kane Hodder smashing that woman in a sleeping bag in number
It's
7.
iconic. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like really brutal, brute strength. You know, Michael Myers is very much, I think, about the one where he holds up Bob and stabs him. Like it just looks at him because it's just very
Mm-hmm.
simple and like creepy. And Chucky's have just become progressive. And like Freddy's more about these really visceral kind of dream induced deaths that are largely influenced by pop culture. But Chucky's deaths are kind of just like, how can we take something vulgar and make it deadly? You know?
Mm-hmm.
Like the way that Junior beats the shit out of his dad with
The
Chucky, and like
dog.
Chucky's like
Yeah.
loving it, you know, he's like having a blast. Like it's and I think that juxtaposition of like comedy and horror is so well done, not just in the TV show, but in the franchise overall, because very few like horror comedy is just hard to do, even when you're
Mm-hmm.
doing dark comedy, but they pull it off in some way. And again, it's fucked up what's happening. It's just you're not really thinking about how fucked up it is because of how almost glamorous the death scenes are.
Yeah. Like you know, the kill they repeat in Bride and in Cult with the glass ceiling shattering. It looks great. You know, you don't think about like the person being cut to shit at the bottom of it. But yeah, I mean, like I was saying, I like Devon Sawa. I like the adult actors. It kind of felt like the adults didn't really have anything to do. Like
Yeah,
the only one who's really memorable, and God help me, I can't even remember her name off the top of my head, was the detective. You know, because she was sort of in it, but like, you know, everyone else, they're the clueless parents who are there until they die. You
yeah.
know.
And I think that, I mean, I would assume that that's by design. because
Yeah,
this
probably.
really is about the kids. And I
Mhm.
think that's, I mean, I think that's what made Child's Play so effective is like, and the first first three in my case, but for most people, first two movies like so well done is like, you're not really concerned about what the adults are doing. The first one you are because you have the Chris Sarandon and you have the mom, I forget her name.
Because you don't know that it's Chucky doing it. So that's one of the things people forget about the first one is that, you're supposed to watch it like you don't know what's going on, and then, oh shit, the kid was telling the truth. He's not the one actually killing these people. You can get
Yeah,
away with that there.
and it
Mhm.
works, but it also works in transitioning that responsibility to Andy, right? Like that's why I think it's so easy to relate, and particularly when I saw these movies, and I'm sure you the same age, like you see them at a young age where you can relate to Andy's character, and so there's something in just really engaging about, I don't always think that I don't always buy into the belief that horror is an escape vehicle for us to explore our darkest things. I think that that's largely like a very cool thing to say. I don't always agree with that to be true
Mhm.
because I don't really
Mhm.
have a lot of fantasies about being chased by killers. Um, but I do think that when you're able to relate to the characters, the horror becomes so much more entertaining and engaging. And in this case, Andy is a character that, I wasn't like Andy as a kid, but he was my age and I can relate to that.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that that to me is like one of the best of all the connections they tried to make, aside from the Tiffany connection, which I think is just that's inherent to this series at this point. Like
Mhm.
Tiffany and Jennifer Tilly are as a much part of the series as Brad Dourif and Chucky are at this point.
Absolutely. Mhm.
But bringing back Alex Vincent into the Andy role, I think, was a really smart move, and really giving him some greater purpose, especially with the Cult of Chucky, how that started, because the character is there's still a lot to be done with it. I think now that he's an adult, and I think that that seems to be what they're alluding to with the second season is this continuation of
Mhm.
what largely was supposed to be the big plot at the end of this one will precisely be continued. I do wonder, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts about this as well. Like, what, how do they proceed into a second season at this point?
Uh, I don't know. I mean, part of it would have to pick up exactly where it leaves off, because Andy's driving the good guy dolls, but at gunpoint, and he's not gonna that like that's not going to have a conclusion. Like he's gonna swerve off the road at some point. Like there's immediate action that's going to have to happen after that. It's not going to cut to like a year later or something. Also, I don't know if Nika can survive having all of her limbs amputated by someone who's not a
Yep, not a
doctor.
doctor.
Like, not a doctor. Um, that poor fucking character. I mean, I feel like Don Mancini saw that she did a good impression of her dad and was like, let's just put this character like to the side for now. I don't know, maybe she'll die, but like the the idea of having uh when she goes back to being Chucky next season and Chucky's gonna not have any limbs, like what the fuck is that even going to look like? That's just gonna be absolutely ridiculous. Um, so I don't know how that's gonna go out. Are the kids coming back? Are they gonna like try to hunt him too? I don't know. Maybe Kyle's dead, maybe not.
I mean,
I
I
don't.
really don't think they planned a second season to happen. Like, I genuinely think that going into this, they probably thought we'll be lucky if we can make it through. Like, I mean, I guess now the way television is it's all the streaming model, so it's not like we're doing 3 episodes and then if it fails, we're not going to continue making them. I get the sense these were all
Yeah.
premeditated. So, and they probably weren't expensive to make. Like, they look really good. Like, I think that that's something to
Mhm.
be, again, you know, advancements in technology makes seemingly low budget seem to be really high budget.
Mhm.
But I genuinely think they didn't go into this assuming that this was going to continue. But to that end, like, part of me thinks that it was almost perfect the way it was. And I'm open to being wrong about this. I'm open to being, wrong that one season's good enough. But I almost wonder if, like, to that point about Nika, my mind goes in the direction of, well, what if Chucky just puts on like a hook and like goes full blade like Puppet Master and has a hook and like a knife for a hand and like,
And
you
what
know,
about
like
the legs? Just like a tank treads for the legs? Like, how's
kind of
that
like the
gonna
Toy
work?
Story, like that doll and like the kid in Toy Story, Sid, you know, who was
Oh
stuck with
God.
all the dolls.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that there's a level of absurdity that it largely stayed away from, and I think that that's what made it work. Is like they did just enough to push the boundary of like what people would buy, without
Hmm.
asking too much.
They're
That
gonna ask for more next season. We're gonna have to see what happened with Glenn or Glenda. I mean, because like Jennifer Tilly said Glenda. I think Chucky said Glenn previously. So like I feel like Don Mancini never decided how he was going to wrap that up ever. But now that he's like sort of rebooted everything since Curse of Chucky, he's like, all right, I guess I could fit that in somewhere, but I don't know how he's going to do it. But he's going to have to do it next season because you don't make a show about a killer doll who mentions he has a son who is, gender
non-binary.
fluid.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then just never come back to that. I'm wondering if maybe they shot it with like a finite ending, but when they found out they were being picked up, then maybe I don't think they did reshoots, but maybe they shot it like both
Like
ways.
two endings kind of thing.
Yeah, so like one where I don't know, the doll truck blows up or something like that. But since they knew they were getting renewed, I guess they put the to be continued ending on the end because something's got to happen to all of those good guy dolls. They're not going to blow up. They're going to get out.
At
But
least one's got to get out. At least one.
yeah, exactly. So, but honestly, I mean, when is Chucky ever going to end? And I remember watching at the end of Curse of Chucky that post credit scene, and I've said this to you before. I mean, I love the series. I'll keep watching it, good or bad, because it's interesting. But if Curse of Chucky was the last Chucky movie, and that post credit scene was the last scene of the entire franchise, I would have been fine with that. I would have been like, all right, this is fine. If Don Mancini wants to reboot it down the line, if anyone wants to do anything else with the character, I'm like, okay, that's headcanon. But like, it made me think that I want to see an end to this eventually, which I guess is antithetical to me saying that I will watch like 10 of these. So, they have my money
No,
no
I
matter
think that
what.
there is, again, it's too much of a good thing, right? Like I love tacos, but I definitely know that if you were to feed me tacos in perpetuity, I'd probably get a little sick of them. And so I think
I
that,
don't know if I would, but go on.
well, I'll narrow that to one kind of taco. If I'm getting like al
Mm,
pastor tacos all the time, every time I eat tacos, eventually I'm going to wonder what's it like to not have a taco, and I think
Or a
that there
carnita
is,
taco.
yeah,
Yeah.
or yeah, something different. But I think that there's, and I don't necessarily think that, I think a lot of this hinges largely on who wants to keep doing it, right? Like
Mhm.
Brad Dourif, I imagine this doesn't command that much of his. I'm not going to put downplay how amazing he is. More just to say, like, voice acting is much less demanding than
Mhm.
acting, and he's getting older. And so I think that largely this is the end is largely tied to the people who are behind it and their willingness to continue doing it, and someone's willingness to continue producing it. Um, but I definitely agree with you that I don't know. I don't want this to continue in perpetuity, because I think what it kind of keeps proving over and over again, and I don't think that there is a limit to your luck, is that you can, like, they can reinvent themselves enough ways, but there is a limit to that reinvention, to the point where the Chucky character itself can't, like, you can't do much more with it that hasn't been done. Like I think this series really does
Mhm.
a lot with the character that has been done, but what makes it better is just that they've modernized it in such a today way. Like this is something that really lives in the now, and is definitely reliant on so much of what's we know of today. Like there's numerous mentions of Snapchat, the way the use of
Mhm.
cell phones and everything. Like all that stuff is very much grounded to what we see today. But I wonder, like, as far as would you imagine any other franchise could go this route of, now that we have a successful Chucky series, and I consider it successful because it got renewed. I imagine that the reviews that I've seen seem to be pretty positive.
Mhm.
Um, and we're seeming, I think we're both in agreement that it's a pretty it's much better than it ever needed to be, and never most people thought it would. But could any other
Mhm.
slasher franchise pursue this to the same level of success?
When you say this, do you mean like the next installment is like a miniseries or a TV show with like the same continuity, or like you mean something rebooted as a TV show like Scream, which I still haven't seen?
Yeah, I haven't seen the Scream show, but that's more I was going for. I was like, do you think that there could be like a Halloween TV? And I hate to use Halloween because I feel like the Halloween well is so dry. But like Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street. I mean, Leprechaun even, which might just be like a Chucky show, except
Leprechaun. I mean, honestly, a year ago, if you asked me about there being a Chucky show, I would not have believed you at all. So it's this is like the fifth time I've said this. It's a minor miracle that this has happened at all, let alone one that tells a complete story. Also, if you're making a series or miniseries or whatever, like what's the driving force? What's the goal? It's just to kill people, right? And I guess in this one, Chucky had a little more of a grand plan. But like, if you do make a Michael Myers TV show, it's got to be Curse of Thorn, the TV show, because like you have nothing to hang your hat on. He's just like a void, and like you said, the well is running pretty dry with that, and that there's, you know, he's the star, but like he's nothing. It's like Final Destination. It's just death,
mm,
you know. I actually I got bored over the pandemic, which is still going
as
on.
you do.
But
Yeah.
yeah, and I came up with a lot of like half baked ideas as to what a Nightmare on Elm Street series would be like. And I'm like, okay, maybe that's something that you could turn into like a multi-episode arc to a certain extent, but like it's got to end at some point. It has to, and I know that it never ends because these characters are never dead. But if you're gonna make a TV show, I think based on a slasher franchise, there has to be a climax within the show. You can keep bringing the killers back, but there has to be a line of demarcation, so it's not just like, and also you got to have them do more than just kill people, or at least like have a plan to kill people in a certain way, like Chucky did with the whole rules of voodoo. So I'm not against people trying it out, but I can tell you with 100% certainty, not knowing anything about it, but the Sean S. Cunningham produced Friday the 13th TV series that would have been awful. There is not a world in which a show about the people who live at Camp Crystal Lake is interesting or good at all in perpetuity. Maybe make a movie about it. Maybe that'll be halfway decent, but like, I don't want to learn the backstory about the diner owner or the people at the convenience store in the first Friday the 13th. Get right the fuck on out of here.
Yeah.
I mean,
And also there's a level of, with those, particularly Jason and Michael Myers, is like they don't talk. And like,
yeah,
you
people
can't,
talk about them a lot and they're usually wrong.
but like you can't, but like there's a, I think part of what made this work is that Chucky is itself, and why a Nightmare on Elm Street series could work in turn in a similar vein, is because those characters talk. They have personalities that are in and of themselves enough to charge the price of admission and keep people entertained. As I say this, I'm looking behind me through the camera of realizing there's a Hellraiser TV show coming out, which I'm not super excited about, to be honest. I think that no one's done Hellraiser right since the fourth one, and I'm I'll die on that hill. But
we could have a whole conversation about the Hellraiser series, but I do agree with you. Hellraiser Bloodline, not a great movie, but it's too interesting to just write off.
Yep, and I also think if Charles Band was just a little, I don't know, more willing to let go of some things, I think a Puppet Master series could be really entertaining.
Charles
If done
Band
correct.
letting go of some things. That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
no, yeah, I could kind of see that. I mean, the Puppet Master franchise is almost like a TV show as it is. There's almost enough entries for a whole fucking season. but they do kind of go all over the place, and then magic gets involved. And going back to Chucky for a second, like he uses voodoo, right? The Ade Due Dambella, which I'm sure is made up, but like voodoo's a whole like practice. It's like a whole
Yeah.
religion, and we've just heard 2 spells over 7 movies and a TV show: the spell to transfer his soul into a body, and the spell to split his soul. The dude studied voodoo. What else does he know? I want to see that. I could totally. I'll watch that.
I think we're largely beholden to a fad of which the time when the original Child's Play was made, when Haitian, like all the books like Serpent and the Rainbow and things like that were coming out, and we were learning about the actual practice of voodoo. But there's so many different aspects of it. In fact, I was just watching, I forgot what movie I was watching, but they mentioned like Santeria, and I'm like, oh, it was Maniac Cop 3, and I'm like, they mentioned Santeria, and I'm like, they literally use it as just one, like, as the reason why he comes back. But like they just name dropped it, just like they did in Predator 2. Like you have the Santeria, like, people, the gang that just largely gets butchered. But like I think that voodoo is just what they're beholden to. Like that's if I remember correctly, Don Mancini's original concept wasn't
it
voodoo
wasn't
related.
that. It was the kid's id sort of brought the doll to life.
Which they kind of like, you can kind of see shades of that in this. That he's kind of, the whole mention of he has to, like the whole junior arc is largely about if he's able to convince somebody else, a young child essentially, to do these things willingly, then he has the ability to take them over. Which is kind of, again, making that same case around the id, is that, can you harmonize the ids between 2 characters? But I think that, again, as far as cleaning up the past to make sense of the present, they did a pretty good job making that work. As far as more voodoo stuff, listen, if Chucky wants to summon an army of Chucky zombies, I will totally watch an episode of that. But I think I'm positively or cautiously optimistic about a second season, only because I was so kind of sideswiped by this season of being like I was surprised I liked it as much as I did, not because I'm not the world's biggest Child's Play fan. Like I would, in fact, up until this series, I probably would have put that franchise maybe like in the middle of my favorites. But I think
that's fair. Yeah.
Like I think this gives it some credibility that I think a lot of the other, in fact, I think in some ways, even though Halloween is still my favorite of the slasher franchises, I think what's being done now is making me is kind of doing more harm than good as far as my opinion goes. But in this case, Chucky's series has actually done a lot more. And I want to go back and watch Seed of Chucky, because that is, for me, one that I don't think I ever watched it at a time where I actually was able to understand what they were trying to do.
Oh, I don't think anybody did. I think that movie came out and it was met with a huh, but then it grew on people like Nightmare on Elm Street 2 to a certain degree. Not even because it's queer, but just because it kind of wasn't what people were expecting, and it caught them by surprise, but it aged better than a lot of other stuff in that franchise.
For sure. And I think that it did, it is one of those movies that begets revisiting. Whereas it's funny you mentioned Nightmare on Elm Street 2, because I always loved that entry when I was younger, and I never could explain why. And I think it's because
I can tell you why, Matt. Let's have a conversation.
No, I think what it was, it's so different. I think, and I didn't see them in order. I didn't watch 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, I didn't either.
You're
at the mercy of whatever's on TV or in the video store, but yeah.
But there was always something like, oh, this is a different one. It's something like one of these is not like the other. Whereas Seed of Chucky, when that came out, I think my expectations of Child's Play films were largely defined by the first 3. And even to some extent, I didn't love Bride of Chucky when I first saw it, but I grew to love it after repeat viewings because I got it. I was like, oh, I see what you're doing there. So I think there's, this is pretty much a Don Mancini love fest, but it is he really is, I think, done a pretty fucking great job of keeping this thing going in a way that is not exhausting. And I think that you can't say the same about so many other franchises that even try and reboot themselves, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre is.
I wasn't going to say it, but yeah. I just saw the trailer for the new one that comes out on Netflix in February. And listen, prove me wrong, Leatherface. Prove me wrong, Texas Chainsaw Massacre series. I'll keep watching them because they keep being made, but I don't know why. And this trailer did not give me any more hope. It was just a teaser, but I'm like, all right, what's this going to be? But then who knows? Maybe I'll come out loving it like the Evil Dead remake.
Yeah, and I didn't watch the trailer for it because I have not watched a Texas Chainsaw Massacre film in full since the Michael Bay, whatever that one remake was, the one with Jennifer Garner was. And to this day,
Jessica Biel.
Jessica Biel. I'm sorry, I always confuse Garner and Biel. I don't know why. But I just haven't kept current with that. But I still love, in a weird way, the first three. Well, the first one's a very easy one to love. The second one, I can understand people why I don't, but I still do. And the third one, if it was just its own, like, if treated as its own movie, just happens to have Leatherface in it, it's great. But I won't die on that hill either. So
it's fair.
So
it's fun. Yeah, but that's a whole nother conversation. But
I think, and I would love to at some point go through the Texas Chainsaw Massacre films and
would you? Sorry, I was real shitty. Go on.
No, I really would, only because, not because I enjoy it, because there's a part of me that's a masochist. I did watch all the Puppet Master films in chronological date of occurrence order, which I don't recommend because they make less sense than they do in actual sequential order.
Wow.
But
you watched all the wrong turns also. I told you not to, but hey, listen, if you like it, you like it.
Listen, 7 wrong turns do make at least 2 of them right. I can guarantee you that. But
yeah, at least 2.
To cap this out, on a scale of 5, what would you give the entire Chucky series?
The whole, the TV series, not the whole
TV
franchise.
Series, yeah, not the whole franchise.
3.5, I'd say. Maybe 3. I'm gonna say 3.5.
I'm somewhere around 3.5, 4. I'm middling. I'll probably put it at 3.75, even though that's not a real rating in my mind. But
3.25 for me, sure.
Because I think that it's so much better than it had any right to be. I think that, that's not a bad score in my mind. Like, I think that to be a 3 at anything is actually pretty good when it comes to horror films. There's usually quite a bit of redemption in 3s, but to be above that is good. And I think it's almost impossible for a show like this to ever be a 5. It's too much to be taken like Midnight Mass, where you can just engorge yourself with this totally this love letter to Stephen King. But still, I think it's a pretty good show, and I think it does so much right that it rightly didn't have to, or largely probably couldn't have, if it didn't have the dedication of the consistency of cast and creator constantly being involved in all of the films. I mean, again, look at Halloween. Yeah. They try and bring these old characters back, and it's just not as compelling.
That's another conversation too. But yes. Yeah, but also actually, Chucky made me think of Ash versus Evil Dead, which I think was the first one, I guess maybe the first resurgence of a horror property as a TV show. Or I was like, what? They're doing what?
And it worked.
Yeah, it did. And we got 3 seasons of it. 3 seasons of something that we never thought we were ever going to see, which was Bruce Campbell coming back as Ash and it being good. So if Ash versus Evil Dead is good and this is good, maybe that Friday the 13th TV series will be good. No, it won't. Not the one they were going to put on the CW. God, I would love to hate read one of those scripts, but it's because I have a cold black heart sometimes. Anyway,
it would be like the Vampire Diaries with Jason Voorhees walking around, and
oh my God,
it's just too much melodrama for a slasher. But prove me wrong. Someone prove me wrong, and I will absolutely.
Someone please prove us wrong. And as horror fans, we do love to be proven wrong.
Oh, absolutely. I think the Child's Play franchise as a total has continued to prove people wrong, not just because the initial receptions are largely changed over time, but also because the series is more relevant now than some of its peers are attempting to be. And I think that that's admirable and difficult at the same time. But Lowell, it's been good chatting with you. I think we've exhausted what we could possibly discuss on this series at this point. Unless you have any other comments or thoughts.
No, that's about all I got for Child's Play in the Chucky series, whichever one we're legally allowed to say.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm down for a second season.
Yeah, well, hopefully that second season does happen. I'm sure it will at this point. If they're telling the world it will, and when it does, I'm sure we can do another one of these and see if we are proven wrong yet again or proven right, or who knows. I mean, I have. I'm not going to say in Don Mancini we trust, but I will say he's got my vote of confidence.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, take care, everyone.